you don't always get a V'zot HaBracha Shabbat afternoon. It depends on how the calendar goes. So it's a parsha that gets a lot of ritual attention because it's read on Simchat Torah, evening and morning, but it doesn't always get a lot of study attention because we're focused on the holidays, not the parsha this time of year. But this is a Shabbat of V'zot HaBracha, because we're going to be reading it on Wednesday morning, Tuesday night, Wednesday morning for Simchat Torah. And I thought we should look into the end of the Torah. And I have 4 or 5 kind of bursts of Hasidic wisdom, fantasy, using the thing that they already want to say about Torah study and life and kind of smushing it into the last words of the Torah, which is a very Jewy thing to do, right? But I want to start by saying that if you love Torah, which I hope we all do on some level, but if you live in a certain part of the Jewish world, you really love Torah, then coming to the end of it is melancholy. Like it's a celebratory holiday, Simchat Torah, but God, we've been with this story since last year, and I know we'll get to there next year, but boy, the journey is over. And I can imagine the commentators in the Midrash and also of the Hasidic era saying, I need to squeeze every last drop out of this material before I'm ready to start again. Many Talmudic and rabbinic texts end in flourishes, end with these great stories or great parables. The Torah does not end with a flourish per se. We'll see. It just ends with the end. But there's so many rabbinic expansions of it that turn it into something bigger and grander and even more exquisite than it is. Let's look at the verses. These are the last 3 verses of the Torah. And we kind of get the Torah's editorial voice. There's no more speaking. V'lo kamna v'od. There was never another prophet b'Yisrael, in Israel, Moshe, like Moshe. By the way, that limitation, there was never another prophet like Moshe in Israel, led some to believe, but other nations pretended they had someone like Moshe. But the Torah is saying, in Israel, no one ever even attempted to pretend to be like Moshe. Although there was a phrase, where I don't think Maimonides said it about himself, but it was said about Maimonides, mi Moshe le Moshe, from Moses to Moses, Maimonides, because his name was Moshe ben Maimon, lo kam kma Moshe. There was no one like Moshe in between, suggesting that Maimonides almost made it to the level of Moshe. And what about him? Asher yida'o Adonai, whom God knew, and the Yodea in biblical Hebrew can sometimes mean an intimate, even a sensual, sexual knowing. Sometimes people translate this as whom God singled out, whom God made special. In what way? Panim el panim, face to face, because Moshe is the only one who was able to see God face to face. And even there, Moshe doesn't see God face to face because Moshe sees God's back, but had an intimacy with the divine that no one else will get to. Okay. Any thoughts or comments or questions just on that first of the last 3 verses? Okay, let's go to the next verse. The next verse kind of, you wouldn't write this in English grammar putting a period after panim el panim, because it continues the thought. In what way was Moshe different, singled out as a prophet? L'chol ha'otot. The la here is probably regarding, with respect to. It's translated here as in. Kol ha'otot, all of those signs, v'hamoftim, and the wonders. Which signs and wonders are we talking about? Plagues, right? Egypt, right? For the most part. Asher shalacho Adonai la'asot be'eretz Mitzrayim. It's, again, hard to translate into English, but something like, with which God dispatched him to manifest in the land of Egypt, lefaro, to Pharaoh, ulachol avadav, and to all of Pharaoh's servants, ulachol artso, the whole land. So it's continuing the thought. There was never a prophet like Moshe, that very same Moshe, through all of these signs and wonders that God did. And verse 12 is also a continuation of the sentence. You wouldn't put a period after verse 11 either. Ulachol hayad chazakah. And regarding the entirety of the, very hard to translate this word for word. if you translate it as the entirety of the strong hand, it doesn't really make sense. Something like, and with respect to all of the power, ulachol hamorah hagadol, and the great awe, morah from the root yareh meaning fear or awe, asher asa Moshe le'nei kol Yisrael, that Moses did through to the eyes of all the Israelites. So verse 10 says there was no one like him. Verse 11 said there was no one like him vis-a-vis what he did with God's help to the Egyptians. And verse 12, the last line of the Torah is, also there was no one like him in terms of the great might and awe that he showed or expressed to the eyes, which means in the face of, in the presence of all of Israel. Chazak, chazak, v'nid chazek. That's the end of the Torah. There was no one like Moshe, and there never will be. No one like Moshe in terms of what he did to the Egyptians. No one like Moshe in terms of what he did for the Israelites. If it's been a while since you slowly read the last words of the Torah, what's a takeaway? What's the impact these words have, if any? Good ending, mediocre ending, God could have done better. Judy, you're going to say something?
It seems a little underwhelming.
Like a bit of like an anti-crescendo, right? An anti-climax. Like there was no one like Moses, then it just kind of ends. Yeah. Remember all those things Moses did? End. Anyone else? How do those verses live for you? Irv, take the microphone.
I'm a big Moses fan.
Okay, good to know.
Moses, remember Pharaoh was like godlike, 400 years of slavery, he freed him. There would be nothing without Moshe. So I don't think it's anticlimactic. I think it's the way it should end.
So so you're reading it, Irv, differently than Judy, that we're ending on the great triumphs of this inimitable leader who vanquished Pharaoh and made quite an impression on the Israelites, right? Because if Moshe had vanquished Pharaoh, but not made an impression on the Israelites, then they may not have followed him in the desert, right? So maybe it's exactly saying that this is the highest praise you can give a leader. He defeated the enemy and got followers, and the proof is that we're still reading it. Barry, put your hand up.
Yeah, I think the
Brian.
The anticlimax is a bit of a point. The tradition teaches us that Moses' mother is Yocheved, but that's not actually a part of Torah. So Moses could have come out of nowhere. And I find that to be a bit more poetic than Moses was this descendant of this great lineage. So ending with this, there never arose another prophet like Moses, could either be Moses himself writing, there's never going to be anyone like me, which, okay, fine. Or it could,
In all humility, let's just be honest, there'll be never anyone like me, yeah?
Or it could just be a quiet end to a life well lived.
Yeah.
The same way Moses came out of nothing, he returns to nothing in the steppes of Moab.
Yeah, good. I mean, if you think about it, is there any eulogy or epitaph that's not anticlimactic on some level, no matter how long or great a life lived? At some point, the eulogy hits 1,500 words and it's over. And Yehi Zichro Baruch. And we had the unveiling for my father in August, and you've all confronted this on some level. You know it's going to be that way, but to see someone's name in stone, that's what it's reduced to. He's there. He lived. Now it's on to the next thing. So maybe you're saying, Brian, that Moshe's life ends like all of our lives are going to end, which doesn't undo the greatness that he did, but then it's just over. Yeah. You going to say something, Bobby? Hand the microphone down.
This is somewhat of a half-baked thought, but I'm thinking of the 13 principles of faith and how there's a handful that attribute to Moshe and also to receiving the Torah, and how we won't receive another Torah and there's nobody else like Moshe. And I feel like that is an echo of this, in that if somebody who is not Torah observant or is not Jewish is reading this, and they read from Bereshit, from the very beginning all the way to the end, and you're basically trying to, shop what is the ultimate word of truth with a capital T, and you're like, okay, well, let me see what's got the best quality and quantity and durability and like everything. It's got all the 5 stars on everything. I mean, I think this is basically ending and saying, this is it. If you want the word of God with a capital T, this is it, and take it or leave it. Like we've got this far, and it's kind of like a mic drop moment in a weird way. I read it as being very uninspiring and underwhelming, but at the same time, it's kind of like, he was the greatest, and this is the greatest text, and God is the only one.
Yeah, and kind of take it or leave it,
Take it or
right?
leave it, yeah.
Yeah, so what Bobby is reminding us of is in the Yigdal, Lo Kambi Yisrael Kemoshe Od Naviu Mabit. So it's almost a paraphrasing of the end of the Torah in that prayer. Good. Okay, so now let's look and see if, I don't know if we're going to get to all 5 of these, but these are 5 different, mostly Hasidic takes of rabbis trying to squeeze as much something out of the end of the Torah and out of the end of the life of Moshe as possible. Okay, this is a text number 2 called Mishmeret Itamar, written by Rabbi Itamar Wolgelernter. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. 19th century Eastern Europe. And he plays a letter game. He looks at Le'enei Kol Yisrael, and he looks at the Rashi Teva, the first letters of each word, right? An acronym. So look what it says. That Reish Taf in the beginning of the Hebrew is Rashi Teva. The beginnings of the words of Enei Kol Yisrael. Haim Rashi Tevot is the exact same 3 letters, not in the same order, so it doesn't work that great, of Kohanim, Levi'im, Yisraelim. So a rabbi who's trained to look at every letter and find the patterns, right? He sees this Torah ending, and he can't imagine that it's ending other than on a flourish. And he says those 3 letters, Lamed, Kaf, Yud, if you rearrange them into Kaf, Lamed, Yud, you get to the priests, the Levites, and everybody else. If he were here, I would say to him, Itamar, and therefore, so someone be Itamar's defender from the grave. What could be Rav Itamar's Wolgelernter's therefore? Whether or not you think the last 3 words of the Torah were written in order to create this acronym, he doesn't think so either. He is extracting something, and therefore, Alan, I think hold the mic in the center. Yeah.
I think the impact would be that everyone from all levels saw him, not just the Kohanim or not just the Levites, all of the people saw what he did.
Good. So lest you think that Moshe was a leader who only made time for the big donors, right?
We won't go there, Rabbi.
Hopefully no one would ever make that assumption of any Jewish leader. Kohanim, Levi'im, Yisraelim regarding Moshe. Another way of reading Rabbi Itamar is not just that this is the end of the life of Moshe, but the end of Torah. This text, this trove, this treasure, the society that's going to be built on it in the immediate aftermath is going to be administered by the Kohanim. It's going to be helped by the Levi'im. But who's it for ultimately? All the Yisraelim. I wonder if what Rav Wolgelernter is saying, that there is a hierarchy in the Jewish peoplehood. Some people are uncomfortable with that, which is why that some communities get rid of Kohen Levi, right? We sort of have and sort of do not have Kohen Levi in our community. We no longer duchen, which I regret because I think it's a beautiful custom. But some people are uncomfortable with the notion of there being hierarchy based on birth, who you happen to be born to. And this might be his way of saying, yeah, hierarchy does matter. You can be sure that in Rabbi Itamar's synagogue, only the Kohen got the first Aliyah and only Levi got the second Aliyah. But the Torah ends with a reminder that Kohen, Levi, and Yisrael combined is what makes the Jewish people strong. Possibly. I don't think he was saying that to say nothing. So it's an interesting game to figure out why he was saying it. Good. Let's go to the next one. Niflaot Chadashot. This is a collection I'd never come across before. No one knows who wrote it. The words Niflaot Chadashot means like new wonders, new amazing things. This is source 3 at the bottom of the first page. On the phrase Asher Asa Moshe Le'enei Kol Yisrael, that Moses did for all of the eyes of Israel. Hapasuk hacharon, the last verse of the Torah, Mekushar is connected lepasuk harishon shel Torah, to the first verse. Now, he's not just being cute here. What do we read immediately after reading this verse on Simchat Torah? Breshit, right? Ritually speaking, the Torah never ends. We finish the Torah, we begin the Torah, right? So he's saying what we do in shul to go from the end of the book of Deuteronomy to Breshit is actually kind of, it's almost as if you're intended to read through one verse. Asher asa Moshe le'nei kol Yisrael Breshit bara Elohim. And if we put the first three words of the Torah appended to the last words of the Torah, you have a different expanded meaning. So he breaks it down. Asher asa Moshe, that which Moses did. Kol Torato shel Moshe, all of his Torah, his teaching. Kol limudo, all of his instruction. U'fu'ulato, all of his deeds. Le'enei kol Yisrael, were done in the eyes of Israel. And then he interpolates. Shekol Yisrael Yiru. What was the purpose of all of Moshe's existence? That all of Israel would see with their eyes, be'ayin, what? Ki, that, Breshit bara Elohim et hashamayim et haaretz. The entirety of the Torah is to endow its readers through Moses' inspiration with the understanding, as he explains, sheyesh yotzer, there's one who formed us, v'yesh borei, there's a creator, v'yesh manhig libira, which is a Talmudic way of saying there's someone in charge, right? Literally, there's a manager or a director of the palace, right? So he says the Torah does not end. The Torah leads right back to the beginning. Le'enei kol Yisrael. What was it that Moshe was trying to do in the eyes of Israel? To have them know, Breshit bara Elohim et hashamayim et haaretz, that God created the heavens and the earth. We are not alone. Okay, Alan?
This is an extension of a fascinating approach of rabbinic midrashim, because they would take the end of one section and somebody connects it with it to make the change. Meaning that, so we have Miriam dies and then there is no more water. They connect the two because they're side by side.
Yes.
Here, they're tying it in from the very end, wrapping around to the very beginning.
Correct.
I find that fascinating.
Yeah. Thanks, Bobby. Right, and it's as if to saying this isn't the end. It's just it's connected to the next verse. What's the next verse in the Bible? What's the next verse in the Bible? Right, the first book of Joshua. The Bible doesn't end here, but the Hasidic take is the next verse you're supposed to read is not necessarily the first verse of Joshua, which is the Haftarah of Simchat Torah, but the next verse in meaning is really Breshit. There's also either intentionally or coincidentally connects to the first comment of Rashi on the Torah. The first famous comment of Rashi in the Torah is really a funny comment, not a funny comment, but it's an interesting way to begin a commentary that was going to last 1,000 years, which is, why does the Torah begin here? Why does this text that's about mitzvot, that's going to turn into halacha and Jewish peoplehood, begin with cosmology and begin with, the great Nephilim who have nothing to do with the Jewish people, and Noah, who was not a Jew, right? And Rashi's, and why doesn't the Torah begin where Jewish peoplehood begins, with this 12th chapter of Exodus, HaChodesh HaZelechem, where God gives the first commandment to the Jewish people as a people, which is this is a lunar calendar and this is the way you should follow the calendar. And Rashi's answer is, so there should always be an answer to the non-Jews who say, why are you so committed to this God, and why do you think you have a connection to the land, which is, by the way, a very current question. And the answer is not this is going to convince this non-Jewish skeptic, of course, is because the Torah begins to introduce us to the God who created everything, and the God who created everything chose us, right? Whatever you think of the notion of chosenness, the God who created everything brought us to the land of Israel. And that's an important dogma, right? He's saying something similar. The entirety of Moses' existence is so that you believe that this is not an accident, that you're try to become a person of faith. Really lovely thing to extract out of that. Okay, turn the page. Rabbi Baruch of Mejbuj, I just like saying Mejbuj, who was an early Hasidic master. On the phrase Le'enei Kol Yisrael, he also connects it to Breshit. He says, read through, Le'enei Kol Yisrael Breshit, Lefi Einei Yisrael. As he takes Moshe out of this, by the way, so the previous commentary read Moshe's actions in front of the Israelites into Breshit. Rabbi Baruch of Mejbuj imagines just connect the phrase Le'enei Kol Yisrael Breshit to the eyes of all of Israel in the beginning. Lefi Einei Yisrael, through the eyes of the Jewish people. Vehistaklutam b'Torah, and they're peering, they're poring over the Torah. Kach hu chidush maseh Breshit b'chol yom. This is lovely. That is the most significant recreation of the world every day, right? This is the Yeshiva Bacher's dream commentary. This is the kind of commentary that supports something in the phenomenon of the modern state of Israel that I find very troubling, which is such a significant portion of the population that spend all their time studying Torah, not contributing to society, and not serving the army, right? But what they would say is that, or they could say is, yeah, but the whole purpose of creation is for us to study Torah, or our studying Torah every day is the recreation of the world, right? A little bit self-important, but also lifting up what we're doing right now. What we are doing right now is continuing the recreation of the world, right? Lovely, yes. Bobby, Mike?
But it's interesting too, because when it comes to Shabbat and refraining from 13 acts of malachot, we can be creative in so many different ways. So it's like in tribute to Sukkot, when we talk about the 4 types of Jews, and you want to be the etrog, you're doing the mitzvot of all kinds of mitzvot in malachot, and you're also diving into the text. So you have to have both. And if you're just focusing on, the text, it defeats the purpose because you don't have the application there.
I think you're right. You could read this as a little bit elitist, which is interesting for a Hasidic text, or what he means by Histaklutam b'Torah, they're pouring into the Torah, is he might mean not just the cerebral exercise of study, but the being devoted to Torah. And by the way, that is a Hasidic take. That's a Chabad take. Whatever you mixed feelings may about Chabad, they do believe that if they can get you to put on tefillin, not you, Judy. No. You have recreated the world. I didn't mean to be glib about that. The reason I said that is that I'll just tell you a quick story having nothing to do with what I was teaching. When I was on sabbatical last time, I took Noah and Aiden, who were then 11th and 8th grade, on a short trip to Paris from England. And we were walking through Le Marais, the Jewish quarter in Paris. And a Chabadnik came over to me and tried to get me to put on tefillin. So first of all, I had put on tefillin that day. But I decided I would toy with him a little bit, and I said, I would like if you want the notch in your belt to put tefillin on me, that's no problem, but you have to put them on them too. And he's like, oh, but they're women. I'm like, yeah, I know. And we had this extended conversation, and he tried to explain to me. He tried to explain to me why women were prohibited from wearing tefillin, but he didn't know who he was dealing with, and I know the sources, and I know the sources don't say that. And after about 15 minutes, he was like following us, walking down the thing. I actually got him pretty far, and I regret that I didn't let it happen. He said he'd be willing to put the tefillin on them. He used the phrase kila achar yad, like not the exact right way. He was going to put it on the wrong arm. He was going to put it backwards without a bracha. And I wish I would have said yes, just for the visual of a Chabadnik putting tefillin on my daughters in the Marais. But I was stubborn, and I said, either you put it on the regular way, or you can't put it on me either. And then he walked away. So, but what Chabadniks think they are doing when they are getting you involved in Torah is participating in the recreation of the world. Yeah. Mike, we got to be good to the Zoomers.
Twice when I was walking to the shul, a gentleman, obviously a Hasidic gentleman, asked me to make a bracha. And I said, no, I'm on my way. I'm shul. I figured that was enough. If I knew it was going to change the whole world, I would have done it.
Yeah. Well, that's what they want to convince you of, and there's something beautiful about that, right? Two more quickly, since we got all the way there. I want to finish. Likutei Ratzba. This is another collection I hadn't come across before. Rabbi Tzvi Elimelech Shapiro of Dinov. Dinov is in south central Poland. I think it's, if you look on the map now, it's Dynow in English letters. On the phrase Le'enei Kol Yisrael, HaTorah mistayemet. The Torah ends Belamed. The last letter is a Lamed, Yisrael. Shehu ha'ot hagvo'a mikol ha'otiyot. The Lamed is what? The tallest letter, right? Except for maybe the final Tzadi and Fei, right? But it's the tallest of the regular letters. It goes above the lines of all the others. If you're a sofer, you have to be very careful to make sure that your Lamed doesn't, the top of your Lamed doesn't go higher than the bottom of the line on top of it. So it's a tall letter. And you can just see where he's going with this. Remez, this hints, Shahalomei Torah. If you study the Torah, which ends in a tall, grand lamed, umekaima, and you fulfill it, there, Bobby, he's doing both, right? If you study it and you fulfill it, he migadal to. The Torah raises you up. Umaramam to, and exalts you. Al kol hamasin. This is a little bit, again, elitist. You're better than all the other creations. I kind of believe on some level that by studying Torah, you become a more exalted version of a human being. V'notenet lo gdula, gives you greatness. That lamed that we end with is a hint at the greatness you can achieve if you go right back to the beginning and study it again. Lovely pulling out. And then the last one. Also, this was a wonderful discovery for me because I came across sages that I'd never studied before. Amarot Toharot, it's a collection called Amarot Torah, which means pure sayings, by Rabbi Benjamin Haddad of Tunis. I wanted to bring a Sephardi source in here as well from Tunisia. Otiot Sof HaTorah Utchilata. So we had taken a break in the commentaries from those who were connecting the end to the beginning. We go back to connecting them. The letters of the end of the Torah, Utchilata, and its beginning, Hem Otiot Lev, right? Beh Reshit, that's the bet. Uleinei Kol Yisrael, right? So if you take the last letter, the Lamed, and you immediately go to the first word of the Torah, you're at the bet, and that spells out heart, right? Now, I want to put a pause here a second because we don't know what the word heart meant in any generation other than our own. Like, you got to have heart, and like I don't have the heart to tell you. We use the English word heart to mean many of the things besides the beating heart, right? We do not know what Rabbi Benjamin of Tunis meant of it. We don't know what the Torah meant with it. V'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha b'chol levavcha. You shall love the Lord your God with all your lev. We don't presume the Torah meant the organ. So already in the Torah's time, as lev meant something besides the organ. Some people believe that lev was connected to the intellect, right? The Greeks certainly thought that the heart was a center of the intellect and being. So it's hard to know what other cultures mean when they say that you should focus on the lev. It may not mean romance. We don't know what it means. But he wants us to see that lev, which does mean the word heart, is spelled out in the end of the beginning of the Torah. Lirmos, to hint at, shehatalmid chacham, that the scholar nidmeh lalev is similar to a heart. In what way? Kemosha halev. So I think he's here talking about the organ. Notain heyot lechol ebarim. That word heyot could also be chiyut. It's unclear in the manuscript if it's a heyot, which means being, chiyut, which means life. Probably was chiyut, like vitality. The heart gives. Rabbi Benjamin Haddad of Tunis lived late enough to know that the circulatory system relies on the heart getting blood to the organs, right? That it gives life to the limbs. Umimeno ba'ayado heim nizonim, and as a result of the heart and through it, they are nourished by the blood. Kachat tzadik, a righteous Talmid Chacham is similarly. Kamosha amru Chazal, like the sages said. This is an interesting quote. There's a series of stories about a eccentric Torah-loving sage called Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa, who traveled the world like a traveling Torah salesman and sold the Torah and its ideas to everybody. And God says in the Talmud regarding Hanina ben Dosa, Kol ha'olam nizon, the entire world is fed or nourished, bishvil Hanina b'ni, because of Hanina, my son, right? Not my son like Jesus, as if Chanina is mine. So a tzaddik nourishes the world. V'zeh shamar, and that's right, and that's why when it says Moshe at the end of the verse, parentheses, Hamoreh, the teacher, the original tzaddik, tzarich liot, quote, this is now from the end of the verse, Leinei Yisrael, has to be to the eyes of Israel, and he explains, Sheyelahem le'inayim. Moshe, the teacher, like any tzaddik, is supposed to be like eyes for the people. Leha'ir lahem, to illuminate for them, et haderech yelchubat, on the way that they should go. Ulalamdam Torah mitzvot, and to teach them Torah mitzvot. Kihu halev, because the tzaddik is the heart, hanirmaz, that is hinted at, besof haTorah ubetchilata. It's hinted at by the end of the Torah and the beginning. In other words, le'enei kol Yisrael, the last three words of the Torah, lev, right? Who are the eyes of Israel? The lev. Who is the lev? The scholar, the righteous person. Without them, everyone is blind. The Hasidic world really believes that. Without any presumptions, maybe you believe that on some level as well, that if the community didn't have rabbis and teachers and scholars to expose you to the tradition, then maybe the world would be darker, we'd be blinder. I certainly wouldn't have gone into this work without believing it on some level. Not that I'm superhuman, but that my job is to expose as many people as possible to the beauty of Torah and life of Judaism. And that's what a lev does for the body. Altogether, what a marvelous collection of midrashim and commentaries, and ending this text with a great flourish and a reminder that when we study this text, beautiful things happen. When we live a life connected to this text, we live more exalted, and that the thing we should do immediately upon completing it, starting it again.